Trump, who promptly cancelled his planned trip to the Scandinavian country, saying Fredriksson's comments were nasty and a poor way to treat their allies. This left Fredriksson in the unenviable position of having to disseminate the saga with local media.
It is with regret and surprise that I received the news that President Trump has cancelled his state visit to Denmark on the 2nd and 3rd September. A discussion has, however, been raised about a potential sale of Greenland. This has clearly been rejected by Kim Kielsen, a position that I share, of course.
Wow. If you only knew it was that easy not to get Trump to visit your country, you'd just do that, right?
Yeah. I mean, initially I was like, typical ridiculous Trump. But then when I started thinking about it more, there is an issue here too. Why does Denmark own Greenland?
Yeah.
They're thousands of miles away. 300 years ago, I did a bit of research here in my 45 minutes of prep.
Wow.
300 years ago, 1721, a Lutheran missionary set up a mission, converted all the indigenous people to Christianity, and then they colonised the country. So that's almost as ridiculous as Trump saying he's going to buy it when you think about it. Interesting stuff. Doctrines of discovery. Have you ever heard about that?
No.
This whole papal bull back in the 14th century where the Pope declared that any white man who goes to an area where there's no white man living, pop a flag on it.
You've got it.
It's all yours. So, you know, that's even as bizarre as Donald Trump, to be fair.
It's funny because maybe there's a little bit of, because the US has shown interest in buying Denmark before during the Cold War. But one thing that is really ramping up in that part of the world, especially in the Arctic, is that as climate change continues apace and there's less ice, those straits now are becoming really strategically important thoroughfares for massive shipping routes and trade, but also apparently rich in valuable minerals. So do you think there's a bit more to it than just this sort of comedic, satiric sort of pose that we're hearing from Donald
Someone
Trump?
smart would have helped him out, I'm sure. But to your point, Mike, really? Like, who can own that? It's just so inappropriate.
It's like what happened 100 years ago, or who tweeted that, this is what used to happen, back in 1917. You can buy countries then and people, but not now.
Yeah. Now, why is Greenland white when you look at a satellite photo?
I always
and
wondered
Iceland
that.
green?
I always wondered
Why
this.
is that?
Doesn't make any sense.
It's an old chestnut, I know.
Yeah.
Hey,
just white land.
Just finishing off on a really final note, we haven't got a lot of time to focus on this, but in terms of what we might even discuss a bit more tomorrow, but in terms of bring your own devices to schools, was it a craze? Is it something that, in terms of literacy and numeracy and the basics, do we need to get back to that with young people?
I'm so old school, I'm going to say yes every time.
What do you reckon, Mike?
I think it's a challenge for the education system because I think gamification of education's really a strong tool, but I'm just not sure if we're doing it properly at the moment. I think there's a lot of positives.
He's a wise man. You're a wise man.
Not really.
A little bit of a
Just
teaser.
a load of opinions.
A little bit of a teaser for tomorrow. We might sort of continue on that pace. What do you think about that? Bring your own devices to schools. Very good indeed. Ruth Money and Mike Rehu, you've been wonderful this afternoon.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for being on the show with me. See you tomorrow.
Ka kite anō.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo, irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, calls for a criminal investigation into quake insurer Southern Response. And count the zeros. $1 billion bill for botched quake cases. How high could it go? An update on our mission to get an interview with anyone from the elusive state-owned quake insurer. And EQC avoids court finally settling a test case with a family saddled with an on-sold house with faulty repairs. So where does that leave the claimants queuing for a class action? And hundreds of activists march in the pouring rain from Ehumato to the Prime Minister's electorate office. And bad news for homeowners whose properties are deemed to be at risk from flooded rivers and rising seawaters.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. Hundreds of ihu mātau protesters marched for 6 hours in bad weather to deliver a petition to the Prime Minister's electorate office. Protesters are occupying the land near the Auckland airport to oppose a housing development. Shortly after the protest started a month ago, Jacinda Ardern announced a halt on building while a resolution to the land dispute was sought. A group marched today to her office in Mount Albert to deliver a nearly 26,000-strong petition calling for her to visit ihu mātau in person. Mana whenua representative Eru Barakena said they are fighting for their last piece of land.
So we battled high winds and we battled pouring rain. That can only be evidence that we are very serious and very passionate about our cause.
Eru Rakina thanked Ms Ardern's staff for coming out to receive the petition. The Prime Minister says while she was not there to receive it in person, the concerns of protesters have been heard. Students who have been banned from Parliament for a year say they were protesting in solidarity with the ihu mātau Hikoi. A dozen or so were kicked out of Parliament for standing and singing a waiata at the end of question time today. After defying his call for order, Speaker Trevor Mallard announced that the protesters were all banned from Parliament buildings for a year. One protester, Kelsey Lee, says they just wanted to draw attention to the Hikoi.
We just wanted to remind all the MPs in Parliament of what's going on today, because I think it's very easy to forget about what's going on when you're sitting in there all day. So we just wanted to bring the moody of what's happening to them.
Kelsey Lee says she was disappointed with Mr Mallard's response and the ban. Tūhoi have signed an agreement with O Rangatamariki which commits to putting an end to their descendants being put in state care. The Minister for Children, Tracy Martin, and Tūhoi representatives signed the agreement this evening in Taneatua. Māni Dunlop reports.
O Rangatamariki has come under fire this year about the removal of babies from whānau Māori. The agreement between Tūhoi and O Rangatamariki will ensure the ministry will notify the iwi with any cases of tamariki with Tūhoi whakapapa coming into their care. Te Uruto Matua Chair Tamati Kruger says Tūhoi's knowledge of whakapapa and families means they can provide better insights into wider whānau and hapu connections than state agencies and find safe homes for them. The iwi see this as an opportunity for its children to be reconnected with Tūhoi whānau so the ministry is able to withdraw its involvement. Ko Māni Dunlop tēnei.
The police have been unable to explain why protocol wasn't followed, and 3 prisoners were able to escape from Levin District Court last night. Wiremu Eparaima, Te Wera Hemara and Emmanuel Witana remain on the run since escaping last night and briefly carjacking a passing motorist. Locals say it's caused anxiety in the community, with many locking their doors. Manawatu Area Commander Sarah Stewart says she's not sure why only 2 police officers were accompanying 4 prisoners at the time, or why they weren't in handcuffs. She says that in the meantime, police are searching for the men across the Horowhenua district.
The 3 men have links in the Horowhenua area, and it's very likely they will contact their associates or people known to them. We ask these people and urge them strongly not to assist these males and to contact the police immediately. We also ask members of the public, if they have any information at all, to contact us.
Sarah Stewart says an investigation into what happened is underway. The number of cases of measles in Auckland this year has almost hit 600. The latest figures from the Auckland Regional Public Health Service show there have now been 596 cases, up 11 on yesterday's figures. Since last Sunday, the number of cases has grown by more than 100. Maria Pointer from the Health Service says those big increases are concerning.
And I think it really represents the fact that we've got a community-level outbreak. So there's enough measles virus circulating in the community that means that people who aren't vaccinated and exposed are really likely to come down with the disease.
Maria Pointer from the Auckland Regional Public Health Service says people need to check whether they are immunised, and if they think they have measles, they need to call ahead if they're going to see the doctor so they can be kept in isolation. Met Service says northern parts of the country could be in for a wild night with strong winds, heavy rain and thunderstorms forecast. A severe thunderstorm watch is in place for Northland, Auckland, Great Barrier Island, Coromandel Peninsula, Waikato and Waitomo. There is the potential for tornadoes as well. Forecaster Angus Hines says a very unstable air mass is moving across the country from the Tasman Sea. Already there have been intense bursts of rain and thunderclaps around the top half of the North Island. But Mr Hines says the worst is yet to come.
Kicking off late this evening and running through until around about 6 a.m. on Friday, we're expecting the most severe weather at the top of the country, so it could be a bit of a wild night in store for some of those northern areas.
Met Service forecaster Angus Hines. It's coming up to 6 minutes past 5. Rain has delayed the start of the second cricket test between New Zealand and Sri Lanka in Colombo. The match was due to start at 4:30, but heavy overnight rain and thunderstorms have left a lot of water on the ground and it's still drizzling, meaning play may not get underway at all today. Sri Lanka leads the two-match series 1-0. Meanwhile, the Australia captain Tim Payne is expecting a barrage of short-pitched bowling from the English attack when the third Ashes test starts at Headingley tonight. Headingley is known as the quickest test pitch in England, and Jofra Archer in particular is likely to keep the touring batsmen on their toes. Australia have lost star batsman Steve Smith for this test after he was hit by an Archer delivery in the last test at Lord's and was concussed. Payne says they've been preparing for yet another short-pitched bowling.
The guys have got plans in place and we've prepared really well for it. It's now about going out and executing it, and we think the Lord's wicket was quite a difficult one to face short pitch bowling on, so we're interested to see how this wicket plays, but again it's about adapting to the situation, the wicket and what any of their bowlers are trying to do. We've got to have a plan to counter that, and I know our boys will.
Tim Payne. The Warriors halfback Cody Nikorima hopes the Rugby League club's chief executive Cameron George will speak to the players directly if he's concerned about their perceived lack of effort. George has accused unnamed players of a poor attitude and questioned their effort, saying their futures at the club could be under threat. Nikorima says he's surprised by the comments, and while he understands George is frustrated with their poor season, so is the team. That's the news.
A step closer to assisted dying.
I don't think we would have seen New Zealand doctors going around, surreptitiously or improperly suggesting to people that they should have assisted dying if this becomes law.
A step up for city planning.
Even more elderly and retired folk are happy to live in smaller apartment units and don't require that quarter-acre section that we've had traditionally.
A step forward for smoking prevention.
This measure denormalises smoking. It disrupts what some children are growing up thinking is normal. The measure will empower children to protest from the back seat.
A step ahead. Morning Report weekdays with Susie Ferguson and Corin Dan on air and online. Then on 9 to noon, will the Hong Kong government's promise of dialogue restore calm, or is it a trap? We talked to one of the key protest leaders. And after 10, Aussie internet sensation Constance Hall on surviving and standing up to cyberbullies. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. All of the North Island except Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington. Rain or showers, sometimes heavy with hail, squally thunderstorms from Taranaki northwards, gradually easing from the west tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington, fine spells and a few showers, possibly heavy. Rain developing in Gisborne later tomorrow. For Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine, becoming cloudy and isolated showers developing from tomorrow afternoon. For Nelson, Buller through to Fiordland, scattered showers, some heavy with hail and isolated thunderstorms, gradually clearing and becoming fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland, a few showers about the southern lakes, coastal Southland. Fine elsewhere, showers spreading everywhere tomorrow. Chatham Islands, a few showers, turning to rain, possible thunderstorms, heavy falls tonight, becoming fine for a time tomorrow morning before rain returns in the afternoon. RNZ National, it's coming up to 10 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Former Southern Response customers are questioning whether the state insurer should be investigated under the Crimes Act for deceiving its customers. It comes after a High Court ruling last week found a Southern Response practice of writing up two separate costings for home repairs and only offering the customer the cheaper one was deceptive and misleading. Christchurch couple Mark Gilmore and Althea Callis say they have also been shortchanged by $200,000. After ministerial intervention, they had a face-to-face meeting with CEO Anthony Honeybone last year, but he dismissed their claims. And now the couple wants an inquiry into Southern Response and an investigation into whether the company has breached the Crimes and Fair Trading Acts. Logan Church explains.
Mark Gilmore and Althea Callis have an all-too-familiar story of earthquake damage and battling to get their Littleton home over cap and away from EQC. They were hoping to fix their earthquake-damaged home on the hill, but in 2014 a large landslide dashed those hopes and made their home uninhabitable.
We were phoned on the 14th of May 2014 and told what the settlement amount was. So on the 16th, we went into Southern Response and we signed a settlement and discharge agreement for $354,000. There wasn't any discussion really with Southern Response about how they arrived at that figure. We simply trusted them that they would provide enough money for us to rebuild our house.
Trust. That word came up many times in our interview. Mark and Althea were paid out $354,000 and moved away from Christchurch. But then...
In July 16, I applied under the OIA Act for the full Southern Response file. And I did that after reading of someone else that had done the same thing and found these two DRAs. So we did that and we found the two DRAs. And naturally we were a bit upset.
One detailed repair analysis dated the 29th of April 2014 was for $540,000, with contingencies taking it up to $701,000. The second, dated a week later, the 7th of May 2014, was costed at $354,000, with contingencies bringing that up to $478,000. On the figures including the contingencies, that's a difference of $223,000. To put that in perspective...
The cost per square metre went down 40% to $1,533 a square metre. Well, as anyone knows, you can barely build a dog kennel on the hills for that amount per square metre. But to think you can rebuild a house for $1,533, it's just impossible.
As you can imagine, this raised huge questions. What happened in the week between the two DRAs that saw a drop of almost $250,000? Why? Who authorised it? And why wasn't either DRA shown to Mark and Althea when they settled? The couple believed they had been misled and deceived and wanted answers. After trying to get those answers out of Southern Response, they wrote to then Minister Responsible Megan Woods last year, who arranged a face-to-face meeting with them and Southern Response Chief Executive Anthony Honeybone.
Well, the meeting took place at the Southern Response offices.
We passed through security. They knew we were coming. We gave them our names and we were let through.
Mr. Honeybone was accompanied by...
one other person, like senior project manager.
I can't remember his name at the moment. And he listened to our story.
He listened politely. He sat there.
We had given that in writing to him, so he was fully aware of the situation. You know, thanks to the minister, we did get an interview with Mr. Honeybone, but it was a waste of time.
The couple says the crux of the issue comes down to one simple question.
The first question that we asked is how they managed to reduce this large figure to a smaller figure. And they said they got a new independent builder to firm the costs. It turned out this was not true. They never got a new independent builder.
3 weeks after the meeting, Mr. Honeybone wrote back. Here is part of his 3-page letter.
You have requested that Southern Response reopen your settled claim and pay you the difference between your settlement amount and estimated repair costs in the other DRA. Given the evidence on the claim file and the understanding of the process outlined above, I have found no evidence to support your contention that there was anything deliberate or underhand about how the final repair price on which you settled was reached. To be clear, Southern Response will not reopen your settled claim nor pay you the difference you request. After meeting with you and hearing your views on Southern Response, I know that you may feel that my conclusion was inevitable.
A Supreme Court judgment in 2015 slammed the double DRAs. The Dodds High Court ruling last week also slammed the double DRAs, and that's what prompted Mark and Althea to come to Checkpoint.
In my opinion, what you look at, there's only two explanations or a combination, immoral or incompetent. You don't get these results unless you're either immoral or incompetent, and that's what our perspective is anyway.
That $223,000 difference has come at a huge cost.
But it was just such a stressful time. If we'd have been paid out what we believe is the correct amount, it would have changed our life completely.
Yeah, our decisions would have been completely different. We've had 4 houses in 5 years. If we'd been paid out properly, we could have settled probably just once and carried on living normally instead of feeling completely like what the heck's going on.
And the couple is calling for an inquiry into the conduct and behaviour of Southern Response.
I absolutely do think there's got to be a public inquiry because we are only one of thousands. Just one. There's got to be a lot of other people out there that have been basically shafted by Southern Response.
But Mark, a former police officer, is also wondering if a more serious step needs to be taken.
Section 240 of the Crimes Act relates to deceitful behaviour. And my view was that there could be a case to answer not only for a breach of the Fair Trading Act for deceitful conduct, but actually a breach of Section 240 of the Crimes Act, which is a much more serious standard of deceitful conduct.
The ramifications of the double DRAs could be huge. Southern Response is owned by the government, but it's ultimately answerable to the taxpayer. Lawyers estimate the double DRA policy could cost Southern Response and the government $300 million. And you, the taxpayer, would have to pay that if a current class action on this very issue is successful. So that brings us back to Southern Response management and our hunt for its chief executive, Anthony Honeybone. Where is he? In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
So what do Southern Response have to say? Well, we have for several days been asking the state-owned quake insurer to front up for an interview. They refuse point blank. They say they won't engage with us, their words, while the legal window is still open to appeal the Dodds case. Now, that's the High Court ruling that found Southern Response had acted in a deceptive and misleading way by keeping the full detailed repair analysis, quote, secret from the claimants, giving them an incomplete quote that was hundreds of thousands of dollars less. Unknowingly, the couple settled on the lesser amount. Another day, another attempt to get an interview with the Southern Response team. First up, the current board chair, Alistair James.
Alistair James speaking.
Hi, Mr. James. It's Lisa Owen calling from Checkpoint here. Look, I was hoping you would be able to answer some questions for me today. So could we start with how much has Southern Response spent on litigation so far?
No, look, I've already made it clear I'm not engaging any further at this stage, so that's the end of it.
What advice have you had on your total liabilities at Southern Response? Mr. James? Strike one. A hang-up from the board chair. We called back. Strike two. He didn't pick up. So to avoid any confusion, we left a message.
You have telephoned Alistair James. I'm sorry I'm not available at the moment. Please leave your name and telephone number and I will return your call as soon as possible.
Hello, Mr. James. It's Lisa Owen calling from RNZ's Checkpoint program. You've got my details. I'm wondering if you could please call me back urgently. We've got a number of questions that we want to put to you about Southern Response. How much has Southern Response spent on litigation so far? I'm wondering what advice you've had on your total liability. I understand that Treasury put a report to the Minister and that had some estimations of your total liabilities. What are those? Where's the money coming from? Because the taxpayer...
We'll come back to that a little later because there are a lot of unanswered questions. Next up, Anthony Honeybone, Chief Executive of Southern Response since 2017, and before that, the General Manager of Claims Settlement. Now, just a little reminder here. Our Christchurch reporter, Logan Church, went to his office yesterday asking for an interview. The response, not so welcoming.
So I'm going to have to unfortunately ask you to leave.
So when will Mr Honeybone be available?
And if you refuse to leave, you will be trespassing and I'll have no choice but to contact the police.
So, under threat of trespass, today we tried several times to reach Mr Honeybone by phone for an interview.
Welcome to Southern Response. You're speaking with...
Good morning. Could I speak to Anthony Honeybone, please?
Can I say who's calling?
Yes, it's Lisa Owen.
Just a moment, Lisa.
Thank you.
Are you there, Lisa?
I am.
Look, he's not available. Can I have him call you back?
Yes, if he would call me back, that would be really helpful. It's Lisa Owen.
Yeah.
And my phone number is 021... Has he given any indication of when he might be able to do that?
No, I'm sorry. He's in a meeting at the moment, so I'm not sure when that will be.
Is he actually in the office? Did you manage to speak to him?
Yes, yeah, he's not available at the moment.
Okay, but he is there?
Yes.
Brilliant. So will you pass that to him?
Yes, I will.
All right. Appreciate your help. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Strike three. The CEO is ensconced in his office but not available for an interview with Checkpoint. Back to that phone message, though, for the board chair. The list of unanswered questions.
Where's the money coming from? Because the taxpayer would like to know that. So where is the money coming from? I mean, how many other cases do you have that fit into this category? And what work have you done on estimating the number of cases and how much it's going to cost us? The other issue is also this two-quote system that was being run at Southern Response. Who knew and who decided that it was a good idea to withhold that information from claimants? Specifically, it would be useful if you could give me a list of those names, exactly who knew. And when did you stop using that two-quote system? I would appreciate a date, a precise
so many
date of when you
unanswered
decided
questions,
that
Southern
system
Response.
should not be. And Southern Response, the Southern Response chair, has since texted to say, read the voice message from Lisa Owen. Same above applies, no comments during appeal period. Please remind her, I was appointed chair in late December 2018 with no prior involvement with Southern Response in any respect. So I have no relationship with the former Minister Brownlee. And the one response we have had from Southern Response is this one. In the past half hour, they've emailed to say that in the past 2.5 years, Southern Response has spent more than $15 million of taxpayers' money on going to court or being taken to court and associated legal fees. And we'll keep trying to get you an interview. Also, there is no guarantee the cost of Southern Response and EQC bot-sharps won't cost you, the taxpayer, north of $1 billion. Yes, $1 billion. Finance and EQC Minister Grant Robertson says with the combined cost of the Fix-It Fund for quake houses on-sold with substandard repair work and the recent precedent-setting court case ruling against Southern Response, taxpayers are looking at a lot of money. But Mr Robertson can't give an exact figure or any guarantee it won't top out at more than $1 billion. The minister declined to be interviewed on Checkpoint, so political reporter Joe Moyer grabbed a few minutes with him as he headed to the debating chamber to talk about both Southern Response and the EQC on-sold test case that was settled today.
How much does the on-sold settlement announced today cost the taxpayer?
Oh, that's a commercially confidential matter.
So you can't provide any information on that at all?
Part of the agreements that are made by the homeowners and by the Earthquake Commission are that the final cost of the settlement is confidential. I believe some of the specifications around actual repairs can be released, but you'd need to go to EQC about that.
Can you say what EQC spent on the test case?
No, I haven't got that information, sorry.
And do you have any concerns concerns about the level of litigation taken by EQC or Southern Response?
Well, look, in terms of what we're dealing with on the on-sols issue, we recognise that the specific Giblin case wasn't actually going to provide the generalisable information that you would want from a test case. There were specifics and complexities that just meant that that wasn't going to happen. That meant that we then wanted to move to a situation of using the process that we've now put in place of ex gratia payments. I'm really pleased, particularly for the Giblings, that this has been able to happen.
What would you say to taxpayers about how much this is going to cost them?
In terms of EQC, look, we are cleaning up a mess that we were left with here. Nobody can be happy about the fact there have been so many re-repairs that we're now dealing with on-sols where there has been either misdamage or repairs that need to be done. No one's happy about that, but we're trying to do the right thing by the people of Canterbury here.
And just switching to Southern Response, when it comes to estimates for the Dodds precedent, some say it could go as high as $1 billion. Does that sound right to you?
Look, I'm not going to comment on those numbers. As I say, when you look at the combined cost of the re-repairs, of the fact that we're now having to move into the on-sols issues that Southern Response is dealing with, there is a lot of money here. I absolutely accept that. I haven't got a specific number, but this is a mess we inherited that we're trying to fix up.
But can you give a reassurance that it won't go as high as that?
Oh, look, I can't, but I don't have specific numbers, so I can't even say what it will be.
And the High Court found Southern Response guilty of deceptive and misleading behaviour. How far do you think the rot goes in that organisation?
I'm not going to get into that at the moment. We are in the middle of a legal process. I've got to let that play out, but obviously I'm taking advice on the impact of this issue on the Crown overall.
And that was Minister Grant Robertson speaking to our political reporter Joe Moyer. It is almost 26 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We are very keen to hear what you make of all of this. Should there be an inquiry into Southern Response, and what questions do you want answered? Let us know. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Prime Minister wouldn't come to them, so several hundred people braved torrential rain today to take their message to her. Well, her electorate office anyway. The 17-kilometre Hikoi wound its way from Mangere to Jacinda Ardern's office in Mount Albert, with protesters presenting a giant invitation to the Prime Minister to visit the disputed Ehumato site. The crowd was led by a very vocal Pania Newton, the founder of Soul, as it made its way through the streets, with school children lining up in places to greet them. Our reporter Alex Perrottet and cameraman Nick Munro donned their rain jackets and spent much of the day with the protesters as they took their cause beyond the sacred site and into the city.
It was cold, wet and dark, but it was time to take the protest on the road. These protectors and kaitiaki of the sacred site in Maunga at Ehumato decided if the Prime Minister wasn't going to the mountain will go to the Prime Minister, 17 kilometres away to Jacinda Ardern's office in Mount Albert. And 5 kilometres down the road, the children of Mangere Bridge School were standing and holding their painted messages as they washed away in the wet. Their commitment to the Hikoi and the marches so strong that they stood here waiting for them, singing in the rain.
We are walking for justice, justice for the land and justice for the people.
It's been a month since the standoff at Ehumato began, but Pania Newton has been fighting long before that and isn't slowing down, nor is she toning down her pohirihiri to the Prime Minister.
To come to Ehumato and visit the land for herself.
Is she going to, do you think? She's trying to stay out of it as much as she can.
I'm staying hopeful, but I don't accept her justification as to why she won't come and visit. At some stage, the Crown has to take responsibility for the land confiscation in 1863 and then again in 2016. They're robbing the public of a very special cultural heritage site, and so she's also the Minister for Heritage and Culture. She has a responsibility to heed the call of her people.
And then how do you think this is going to be resolved otherwise? This is going on 30 days now. How long are you willing to stick it out?
For as long as it takes. We've been on the land for nearly 3 years now, and we've always said that we'll hold the land for as long as we can until we find a resolution for the protection of Ehumato.
This kaumātua too adamant that there will be a resolution and adamant to walk the whole 17 kilometres.
I'm 70 old now, 73, 74, and I'm still walking the walk, walking the talk. So I hope to get to the end of it all. And now that the rain
it's easing a little bit.
The rain is doing its duty, and we are doing our duty. Now that it's eased off, and we're going to continue on the march.
The Hikoi, with flags and banners, one simply saying, "Come, Jacinda," snaked its way over Mangere Bridge, prompting drivers to toot their horns in support.
Because land's been stolen and land needs to be given back. It's an iconic historical part of New Zealand, so it shouldn't have houses on. I live in Mangere Bridge, so it's a no-brainer. The local people need our full support.
Our mother and daughter, we whānau back to the land through our ancestor kaupare. So yes, we're very saddened but happy to be here today and to represent our whānau and just to stand.
I think we're in it for the long run, whether it's resolved in another 30 days or another 60 days. I think everybody's prepared to sit it out and wait it out, whether a resolution comes now or later.
If somebody takes something of yours, you want it back. Even if it's 100 and something years, you still want it back. Because there's not much of that. That's probably the last of the mountain there, and after that, there's no more.
The Hikoi grew at every intersection, forcing major road closures on St Luke's Road and in New North Road, where the banner-sized invitation was prepared and sealed in its envelope.
Here at the Prime Minister's office on New North Road, the invitation with over 26,500 signatures is currently being handed over. Now, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is not here, but she will hear the chants, she will sense the resolve and get the very clear message from these protesters that the Crown is far more caught up in this dispute than she wants it to be.
The Prime Minister's staff, guided by security, almost swamped by the crowd and greeted with a passionate haka. These tamariki who handed the invitation over aren't here just for themselves. They're already thinking about those who come after them.
We want our whenua back for my mokopuna and also for my children that can come and for my generation.
And they too aren't letting the Prime Minister off lightly.
I feel a little bit disappointed that Jacinda Ardern could go to a rugby game instead of not coming to Ihumātao. How could you go to a rugby game but not come and see us, your people that are down suffering in the cold, and you're at a rugby game?
In Mount Albert for Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the police reveal none of the prisoners who escaped from custody in Levin were wearing handcuffs, why one coastal property specialist is advising people to sell up now, and World Rugby becomes the first major sporting federation to adopt gender-neutral naming. Plus, after 6, more on Southern Response and EQC, so keep that feedback coming. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or if you'd like to type up a little email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We look forward to hearing from you. It is time now for the headlines with Susanna.
Ihumātao protesters marched for 6 hours in bad weather to deliver a petition to the Prime Minister's electorate office in Auckland. Protesters are occupying the land in South Auckland to oppose a housing development. The petition, with more than 26,000 signatures, calls for Jacinda Ardern to visit the whenua in person. Tūhoi have signed an agreement with Oranga Tamariki under which the ministry will notify them about any of their descendants coming into state care. The Minister for Children and Tūhoi representatives signed the agreement this evening. Tūhoi says it can provide better insights into wider whānau connections than state agencies and find safe homes for the children. The police have been unable to explain why protocol wasn't followed, and 3 prisoners were able to escape from Levin District Court last night. Police are searching for the men across the Horowhenua district. Locals say it's causing anxiety in the community, with many locking their doors. The Manawatu area commander says she's not sure why only 2 police officers were accompanying 4 prisoners, or why they weren't in handcuffs, and an investigation is underway. Former Southern Response customers are questioning whether the state insurer should be investigated under the Crimes Act for deceiving customers. A High Court ruling last week found around a Southern Response practice of writing up 2 separate costings for earthquake repairs and only offering the customer the cheaper one was deceptive and misleading. Max Gilmore says he and his partner were shortchanged by more than $200,000. He told Checkpoint he's wondering whether the insurer's behaviour is in breach of the Fair Trading Act and the Crimes Act. People in the northern parts of the country are being warned they could be in for a very wild night with strong winds, heavy rain and thunderstorms forecast. A severe thunderstorm watch is in place from Northland down through Auckland to Waitomo. There is also the potential for tornadoes. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you've just tuned in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time now for business news with Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Afternoon, Nona. So, Auckland Airport and Air New Zealand have both reported their annual results. What do they show?
Interesting. They're basically showing that the passenger growth numbers have slowed. So we can expect still strong passenger growth, but not as strong as it has been. Tourism is definitely going through a bit of a trough here. And so for Air New Zealand, they were also hit by higher fuel costs, and that meant that their net profit was down a third to $270 million. Now, that's pretty much in line with what we saw in Australia as well with Qantas, their rival there. Also saw a 17% fall in their underlying profit, again, because of higher fuel costs, and also in that case, it was foreign exchange movements. Now, so Auckland Airport, dealing with the same kind of issue. They reported a pretty good result. It was in line with their expectations. So at the underlying number was up 4% to $275 million. Interestingly, Auckland Airport is not forecasting any more for the coming year, expecting to really come in about the same number. Again, that's because of the slowing passenger growth. Lots of uncertainties economically. So yeah, that's where that was left. And so the market was a bit mixed on its view of that. Auckland Airport's share price, it dropped more than 2% this afternoon, but Air New Zealand's rose 1.5% because they're going to be looking for some savings. Some $60 million of costs they're looking to cut out of Air New Zealand.
Interesting. Okay, so Sky TV, they wrote down more than $600 million of assets, resulting in a full year loss. What's going on behind the scenes?
Well, they got a new broom there, new chief executive, sweeping up, saying we don't need these old assets. We're going to start fresh. So they really bit the bullet there. And so they reported a net loss of $608 million. That includes $670 million of non-cash write-downs. So it's not real money. They just said these assets we have aren't worth as much as we thought they were. So the underlying profit, they still made money, $240 million underneath that. And the market wasn't too impressed though, because there's a lot of uncertainties about what their plans are. No one really knows. It's a media business, so it's doing it tough. And we saw that also out of Australia with Nine Entertainment talking about stuff. It's also said that their revenue dropped 10% in the past year, and their underlying profit was down 24%. So we're seeing this across the board in that sort of entertainment media space. Yeah, the market wasn't too impressed with that, and their share price fell 4% today. So overall, our index was up 16 points, 16 to 10,725, which is pretty much in line with what we've seen in Australia. But Asia too. Really sort of a bit of a bit of a breather for the markets through a volatile period. And our dollar is trading pretty low, actually, 63.7 US cents, which, we haven't seen for a long time. 94.3 US and 52.6 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with your business wrap this evening. The police have admitted they didn't follow best practice when 3 prisoners managed to escape from custody in Levin yesterday. The trio was able to flee when one of only 2 officers was restrained by a 4th prisoner as they were being led to a van at the courthouse. It's thought none of the prisoners were wearing handcuffs at the time. Laura Dooney filed this report from Levin.
Wiramu e Paraima, Te Wera Hemara and Emmanuel Witana are still on the run a day after they fled from 2 police officers. On the main street of Levin, locals said it was unnerving knowing the men had been able to escape.
When I heard about it last night, I locked the doors, because I didn't want to chance it. I thought, well, I should get in the habit more, and I thought, I've got young children, and I was a bit worried. I thought, well, desperate people do desperate things, so I didn't want to lose my car or my life.
2 cops looking after 4 prisoners
Were they all handcuffed? I wouldn't think so if they managed to be running away and then stealing cars. So if they've been transferred, why weren't they handcuffed to help stop this?
3 people being loose getting into a van is, but even for them it's, I don't know the word's used, but I think they'd need more than just 2 police to handle those many prisoners.
Manawatu Area Commander Sarah Stewart says she does not believe the men were wearing handcuffs at the time. She says as they were being led back to transport, one pushed an emergency lever which opened a garage door and he dashed under it. Ms Stewart says one man held one of the 2 police officers back while the remaining 2 men escaped, pursued by the second police officer.
They ran towards a local supermarket where they got into the vehicle of a member of the public and made him drive them a short distance to northwest Levin, where they asked him to stop the vehicle, and they got out and ran off.
The 4th man, Makaira Feather, was held by police and appeared in the Levin District Court this afternoon, facing charges of assault and assisting the others escape. He's been remanded in custody and will appear in court again next month. Sarah Stewart admits the ratio of 2 police to 4 wasn't right.
That is not best practice, and that is something that we will investigate in the days to come. Best practice would be 1 offender with the 2 officers.
She says there will be an investigation into what happened. In the meantime, police are scouring the district for the men who have links to gangs.
The 3 men have links in the Horowhenua area, and it's very likely they will contact their associates or people known to them. We ask these people and urge them strongly not to assist these males and to contact the police immediately. We also ask members of the public, if they have any information at all, to contact us.
Sarah Stewart says the 3 men are not a threat to the public, but if anyone spots them, they should avoid them and call police. Despite Ms Stewart's assurances, local councillor Jo Mason says she's fielded a few calls from people today, worried while the men are on the run.
One person I spoke to was a little bit concerned about whether it was safe to drop their children off at kindergarten, which of course obviously it is. It feels quite calm, business as usual. I know the police will be working incredibly hard to ensure that these guys are returned to custody.
She says she's confident if local safety was at risk, the police would have got that message out. In Levin, for Checkpoint, ko Laura Dooney tēnei.
Hundreds of thousands of people and billions of dollars of property in New Zealand are now deemed to be at risk from flooded rivers and rising seas. The details are contained in 2 reports released today by NIWA and the Deep South National Science Challenge. At least one coastal property specialist is advising people to sell up now before the tide rises higher. Here's Tracy Neal with the story.
A former resident of Piha, west of Auckland, knows firsthand about the perils of living near water. Kim Kerrigan says heavy rain early last year caused the stream that once trickled past her home to rise over a metre high across the whole valley and through her house. She's now walked away from it.
The council did an investigation and produced a report through Tonkin and Taylor, in conjunction with them, sort of peer review it, and they basically deemed it not safe. It was too high a risk to life and property for people to really live there.
It's a scenario that 2 new reports on hazards predict will happen more often. One focuses on rivers, while the other examines flooding exposure in coastal and harbour areas and how that might change with sea level rise. The reports by NIWA and the Deep South National Science Challenge say almost 700,000 people and $135 billion worth of property in New Zealand are presently exposed to flooding from rivers in extreme weather. A NIWA researcher, Ryan Paulick, says the research shows an urgent need for one uniform national flood risk map for future planning.
A national picture of fluvial flood hazard exposure hasn't been created, and this was the first attempt at bringing together publicly available information to map out where across the country population and building and infrastructure exposure to fluvial flood hazard lies.
Also exposed are 19,000 kilometres of roads, 1,500 kilometres of railway and 20 airports. But that's not all. A further 72,000 New Zealanders and $12.5 billion in property are currently exposed to extreme coastal flooding. Mr Paulick says what the reports do is put a dollar figure on the projected damage. The coastal report uses existing data to model future scenarios.
For a coastal flood event that we might have now in the present day, how much worse could those flood events get in terms of population exposure, building exposure and infrastructure exposure if they happen with increasing sea levels?
At least one real estate agent who specialises in coastal property sales says property near the sea is getting harder to sell. Director of Chick Real Estate in Christchurch, Heather Chick, is advising people who ask to get out now.
It is a problem. I mean, to be quite honest, I've got 2 properties on the peninsula right next to the sea, and I'm thinking, damn, should I sell them now and at least make some money, or do I wait for 5 years and it's going to be worse? And I see it all the time with people. Heather, do we think we should sell now? Do you think, what would you advise? To be quite honest, I'm advising to sell now.
A long-time real estate agent in Nelson says it's getting harder to sell property around Tasman Bay. Doug McKee says costs are going up as floor levels on new buildings in high-risk zones are having to be built up to 2 metres higher than normal.
One property owner said to me, well, look, it's all right, I'll do that, and when the sea level rises, I'll be able to get a boat to go into Motueka to shop. But no, I won't, because all the shops will be underwater.
Kim Kerrigan says getting over the damage to a home caused by flooding is not easy.
It's not been a good situation, and it's been about a year and a half of a lot of grief, a lot of emotional and financial toll, and not a pleasant situation. I wouldn't want to see anybody else in that position.
She says councils have to start making better decisions about infrastructure and get tougher on planning. NIWA's Ryan Paulick says today's reports are aimed at guiding that. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
And let's return now to our earlier story about Southern Response and this 2-quote system that Southern Response was running, which the High Court has ruled that is deceptive and misleading. This person's got in touch to say all insurers regularly engaged in similar practices to what is now Southern Response. Grant Robertson is as gutless at the current Southern Response people by saying he can't comment, and it's something that they've inherited, yet another failure and yet another buck passer. Philip from Glendine has been in touch too. Well done, RNZ, for exposing Southern Response. Their actions undermine trust in government agencies. They set out to deceive claimants with false documents. It cannot go without those who made this decision being called to account. And someone else listening has got in touch about EQC and says, I had EQC paying Chapman Tripp hundreds of dollars an hour to deny my claim because the EQC staff member allocated to me had my file on his desk but hadn't had time to look at it yet. My claim is black and white. The numbers in EQC's own scopes show what I am owed, but instead of EQC honouring my claim, I have to put up with bullying, ongoing delays, childish tricks and word games from EQC. Please investigate EQC. Thank you for your feedback. Do keep it coming. 2101 on the text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the US now. And Donald Trump raised even more eyebrows than usual today during a White House lawn press conference. The US president increased his attacks on Denmark after he abruptly cancelled a visit there when the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, dismissed his idea of buying the Danish-controlled territory of Greenland. Mr Trump said it was nasty of her to call his proposal absurd. Here's the BBC's Nick Bryant.
It's resources rich and strategically well placed, and America's property tycoon president has long seen Greenland as a prized piece of geopolitical real estate. But even though he jokingly promised in a tweet this week not to build a Trump Tower on this barren landscape, the Danish Prime Minister described his interest in buying its territory as absurd. So no longer did the president see the funny side and announced via Twitter that he'd cancel next month's visit to Copenhagen.
I thought it was not a nice statement the way she blew me off, because she's blowing off the United States, and we treat countries with respect. She shouldn't treat the United States that way by saying, what an absurd, she said absurd. That's not the right word to use. Absurd.
The invitation to visit Denmark had come from the royal household, which said it had been completely blindsided by the president's late-night announcement. The country's new centre-left prime minister sounded dumbfounded.
It is with regret and surprise that I received the news that President Trump has cancelled his state visit to Denmark on the 2nd and 3rd September. I had been looking forward to the visit. Our preparations were well underway.
And this was the reaction of her mild-mannered compatriots.
I heard it was because he couldn't buy Greenland. So if he's that stupid, I think it's good that he's not coming.
Greenland is for the Greenland people and nobody else.
It all has the feel of a summer silly season story, but the ongoing trade war with China is more serious. And today prompted this extraordinary presidential claim.
So somebody had to do it. I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it. So I'm taking on China. I'm taking on China on trade. And you know what? We're winning because we're the piggy bank.
But even the President of the United States doesn't have divine powers, and right now he's finding it hard to bend the world to his will. He can summon his green helicopters at a moment's notice, but is finding it much harder to get his hands on Greenland.
Nick Bryant with that report on The Chosen One. And if you're driving in Tuakau in the Waikato tonight, police are still at the scene of a fatal crash between a logging truck and a car. It's on River Road. They say cordons will remain in place for some time, and motorists travelling to Port Waikato are still being diverted via Mercer, so please do take care. The first people to dive down to the Titanic in 14 years say some of the wreck is deteriorating rapidly, eaten away by saltwater and bacteria. Over the course of 5 submersible dives, an international team of deep-sea explorers surveyed the sunken ship, which lies 3,800 metres down in the Atlantic Ocean. Gillian Kitchener reports.
After 14 years in complete darkness, the wreckage of the ill-fated Titanic is in the spotlight again after a wealthy undersea explorer captured new video of the massive and once thought unsinkable steamship.
It is a big wreck. I wasn't fully ready for just how large it was. And when it came up on sonar, it really stood out.
Private equity investor Victor Vescovo led a mission more than 12,000 feet deep to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, about 400 miles from Newfoundland, with a submersible vehicle that took more than 3 years to build. Researchers used a specialized camera to survey the wreck, collecting data for future 3D models of the Titanic for augmented reality and virtual reality platforms. The images may also help scientists predict how the wreck will continue to deteriorate. But despite its state of decay, researchers say it continues to impress.
It was just extraordinary just to see it all. And the most amazing moment came when I was going along the side of the Titanic and the bright lights of the submersible, the first time when they reflected off of a portal and came right back. It was like the ship was winking at me.
In 1912, 2 days after it set sail from England with more than 2,000 people on board, the Titanic struck an iceberg. Over 1,500 people died when it disappeared into the Atlantic Ocean. And now, after 100 years, these striking images are helping keep the memory of that disaster alive.
Gillian Kitchener reporting there, and the Titanic expedition was carried out by the same team that recently made the deepest ever plunge to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, which lies nearly 12 kilometres down in the Pacific Ocean. World Rugby has become the first major sporting federation to adopt gender-neutral naming for its tournaments. The women's title will be dropped from New Zealand's World Cup in 2021, turning both the men's and women's competitions into Rugby World Cups. The governing body says the move is aimed to eliminate bias and elevate the profile of the women's game. The ABC's Eleanor Whitehead has the details.
A woman showing a lot of fitness, back-to-back scores for her.
Women play the game with the same ferocity and passion.
up, number 11.
Now their biggest tournament will have equal branding as World Rugby adopts gender-neutral naming for its World Cups. This is a first for a major sporting federation, intended, it says, to eliminate bias and elevate the profile of the women's game. Catherine Lumbey is a gender advisor to Australia's Rugby League.
It's a fantastic initiative and long overdue. I mean, I think that this will start momentum. I think we've been moving in this direction. It's been very slow, but we've seen the elevation of women's sport.
The 2021 Women's Rugby World Cup in New Zealand will be the first tournament to change its name, becoming just the Rugby World Cup. The new rules will also apply to World Cup Sevens tournaments, in which men and women's games are held simultaneously in the same host city. Kate O'Halloran is a research fellow at Victoria University and a former Victorian cricketer.
It's a move that they should be commended on, and it is quite groundbreaking in terms of world sport. I think if you look at even Australian domestic competition, something like AFL, then we've got AFLW. Women's sport is always marked out as other. Men's sport is always considered the default. So it's really nice to see a world sporting organisation take the lead and say that by removing language bias, we are trying to level the playing field in terms of the attention and respect that these differing competitions deserve.
In cricket, the men still battle for the Ashes, whereas the women fight for the women's Ashes. But some rugby union teams are rebranding. Earlier this year, the French Rugby Federation renamed the men's national side France Masculin. And in England, the Premiership champions Saracens now refer to themselves as Saracens Men. World Rugby said it chose instead to remove all gender qualifiers to create more uniform branding across its tournaments.
And that was Eleanor Whitehead. A rough sleeper in Hawera has unwittingly found himself front and centre of the South Taranaki mayoralty race. Mayoral aspirant Greg Bayliss says if he has his way, the man known to most locals simply as Derek will have to go. In turn, Mr Bayliss has been accused of making cheap political capital out of one of the town's most vulnerable residents. Our Taranaki Wanganui reporter Robin Martin has been in Hawera.
Derek has been a fixture in front of a disused shopfront on Hawera's High Street for about 2 years. He can usually be found perched on an old foam mattress, wrapped in sleeping bags, often smoking a cigarette. Derek doesn't say much but consents to having a photo taken when RNZ comes to visit. Most locals say he's harmless, and although they desire a better life for him, they don't want to see him kicked out. But Craig Bayliss, one of 3 candidates vying for the South Taranaki mayoral chains, says Derek's time is up. A local retailer, Bayliss declined to speak to RNZ, but was unequivocal when spelling out his position to NZME's Hokanui radio station.
Look, my view on Derek is pretty black and white, and this isn't going to be everyone's kettle of fish, but Derek has to go. I mean, if I am successful in my mayoral run, I can tell you right now that I will use every resource available to me as the mayor to remove Derek from that main street. And it's not just Derek, anybody.
Craig Bayliss says he'd introduce a bylaw to prevent people squatting in town and is prepared to personally move Derek on.
That's right. Exactly right. I mean, I'd pick him up and carry him myself if I could. I mean, that might be a bit of a smelly job, but no, he's got to go.
Mr Bayliss says $15 million is about to be invested in downtown Hawera, and having rough sleepers on the street sends the wrong message. Incumbent Mayor Ross Dunlop, who is not standing again, says Mr Bayliss fails to acknowledge the complexities of Derek's situation.
There's actually been a lot of effort going into working with Derek and trying to find him alternative accommodation. I mean, you are dealing with a person that, does have a whole lot of issues, and it's just not simple.
Mr Dunlop says a bylaw is a blunt instrument that has not worked elsewhere. He also took issue with Derek being used as a political pawn.
I think it's rather unfortunate to use one of our more vulnerable members of our community for political advantage. I certainly don't support and agree with that stance.
Current councillor and mayoral candidate Clem Coxhead also doesn't like Derek being dragged into the battle for office.
I dislike using people for your own, for your own publicity purposes, and I'm sure that on reflection that wasn't something that was wanting to be achieved, but we must stand on issues, not stand on people.
Deputy Mayor and mayoral hopeful Phil Nixon also isn't a fan of a bylaw.
Often as communities we're judged on the way we look after our most vulnerable, and I think that we need to actually work with these sort of people that find themselves on the streets for whatever reasons, work with them, work with the appropriate authorities.
Meanwhile, on the streets of Hawera, there were mixed views on Mr Bayliss's comments.
Lost a few votes.
They were really harsh.
Yeah, I don't think move him on.
Derek is no harm to anybody.
I would like to see him removed, but I mean, we've been trying to do that for 2 years.
I was disgusted, really. Just the way it came across.
People on the street, they got nowhere to go. Where are they going to go?
Well, he can move probably down a side street instead of in the main street.
South Taranaki voters will get to have their say on Craig Bayliss's plans at the local government elections in October. I Hawera, mo te hōtaka o te ahi ponei, ko Robin Maknaho.
And a quick bit of feedback before the news about Ehu Mātou and whether the Prime Minister should meet with the protesters and go to the whenua. In explaining her absence from Ehu Mātou, Jacinda Ardern has said she does not think it's appropriate to take a seat at the head of the table. Whoever said she was to take the lead, and anyway, it's not about that. It's about facilitating a dialogue between the Crown and Māori. Even in her role as representative of the Crown, it would appear that Ardern lacks even a basic grasp of Māori protocol. She ought to take a crash course in it, and soon, or risk facing further dissatisfaction. That from Jason.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātaua tēnei. Hundreds of Ihu Mātou protesters have marched for 6 hours in bad weather to deliver a petition to the Prime Minister's electorate office. The group of 300 people battled pouring rains and strong winds to deliver their 26,000 signature petition for Jacinda Ardern to visit the Mangere site. Mariana Johnson reports.
The protesters arrived just after 3 this afternoon and were greeted with a rousing haka from about 50 supporters. The electorate office staff members were silent as the petition was handed over by tamariki from Ihu Mātou. Mana Whenua representative Eru Rākina thanked electoral office staff members and told them they are fighting for their last piece of land. Protesters are occupying the land near the Auckland airport to oppose a housing development. The Prime Minister says while she was not there to receive the petition in person, the concerns of protesters have been heard. Ko Mariana Johnson tēnei.
Parliament Speaker Trevor Mallard says the punishment handed out to protesters who disrupted proceedings in the House this afternoon is fair. The group of young people were kicked out of the public gallery after they stood and sang to show solidarity with the Ihu Mātou Hikoi. After they ignored his call for order, Mr Mallard announced the protesters were all banned from the Parliament buildings for a year. Mr Mallard says this is a standard response and one some MPs are familiar with.
I think there are at least 2 current members of Parliament who have had matters of trespass and court experiences as a result of behaviour defying speakers.
Were you one of them?
Yes.
And the National MP Nick Smith has called Mr Mallard biased after once again being booted out of the debating chamber. Dr Smith was ejected from the House this afternoon after he questioned a ruling by the Speaker and then refused to withdraw and apologise. It's the second time this month Dr Smith has been kicked out, and he says he's becoming increasingly frustrated at being targeted. Under Parliament's rules, MPs are not allowed to directly criticise the Speaker and can be found in contempt. Tūhoe have signed an agreement with Oranga Tamariki which commits to putting an end to their descendants being put in state care. The Minister for Children, Tracy Martin, and Tūhoe representatives signed the agreement this evening in Taneatua. The agreement means the Ministry will notify the iwi with any cases of tamariki with Tūhoe whakapapa coming into their care. Te Uru Taumātua Chair, Tamati Kruger, says Tūhoe can provide better insights into wider whānau and hapū connections than state agencies and find safe homes for the children. The iwi sees this as an opportunity for its children to be reconnected with Tūhoe whānau, so the Ministry is able to withdraw its involvement. Former Southern Response customers are questioning whether the state insurer should be investigated under the Crimes Act for deceiving customers. A High Court ruling last week found a Southern Response practice of writing up two separate costings for home repairs and only offering the customer the cheaper one was deceptive and misleading. Christchurch couple Mark Gilmore and Alethea Callis says they have also been shortchanged by more than $200,000. Mark Gilmore told Checkpoint he's wondering whether the behaviour of Southern Response is in breach of the Fair Trading Act and Crimes Act. Southern Response has refused to comment. A judge has found the Green Party co-leader James Shaw a more credible witness than the man who attacked him on the street. Paul Harris, who's 47, had already pleaded guilty and been convicted of the March assault, but was back in the Wellington District Court today to dispute the details of what happened. Ruth Hill was in court.
Mr. Shaw, who suffered a broken eye socket, told the court his attacker hit him at least twice while holding him by his lapel, and then continued to punch and kick him as he lay on the ground. A couple who came to his aid said they saw Harris hit Mr. Shaw several times while he lay curled in a fetal position. Harris, however, claimed he only hit Mr. Shaw twice while he lay on the ground. Judge Chris Tui said he was convinced by Mr. Shaw's testimony he would know when he was punched in the eye. The judge said, however, there was no proof of a kick. Paul Harris will be sentenced in November. Ko Ruth Hill tēnei.
A Sydney couple has been sentenced to community service after feeding their baby a vegan diet. They were charged with neglect. The ABC's Jamie McKinnell has more.
The girl was 19 months old when she had a seizure last March and was taken to hospital. She'd only ever been fed things like oats, rice milk, potato, vegetables and tofu. Her 35-year-old father and 33-year-old mother, who can't be named for legal reasons, pleaded guilty to failing to provide for their child. Judge Sarah Huggett today sentenced the pair to an 18-month term to be served in the community and 300 hours of community service. She found the mother had suffered depression, which somewhat reduced her moral culpability.
Jamie McKinnell in Sydney. It's coming up to 5.5 minutes past 6. Rain has eased in Colombo, but the start of play remains delayed in the second cricket test between New Zealand and Sri Lanka. The match was due to start at 4:30, but heavy overnight rain and thunderstorms mean play may not get underway today. Sri Lanka leads the two-match series 1-0. Meanwhile, England cricket coach Trevor Bayliss says it's nice to have a bowling attack that has Australia on the back foot. England trail 1-0 heading into tonight's third Ashes test in Leeds. Headingley is known as England's quickest wicket, and Jofra Archer is expected to have a major influence.
It's good to see for England cricket they've got someone able to make the batters jump around. Yeah, there's been plenty of the older English boys quite happy about seeing the guys on the other side of the fence jump around a little bit. But it's certainly an exciting prospect, that's for sure.
Trevor Bayliss. The Warriors halfback Cody Nikorima hopes the Rugby League club's chief executive Cameron George will address the players directly if he has concerns about their perceived lack of effort. Nikorima has expressed surprise that George accused unnamed players of a substandard attitude, saying some players' futures could be under threat next season. Nikorima says the club boss is frustrated with their poor season, but so is the team.
I feel as though, we all turn up with the mentality that, we want to play and we want to win. So he's probably just disappointed like all of us. And, we don't want to blame the coaches or put ownership on them because it should be all on us players. I feel like it may be misinterpreted, but he can have a word with us about it if he does have that problem.
The Warriors play the Sharks in Cronulla on Saturday. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Alison Balance meets the brewers using sound to make a better beer. We have a window on the world of entomologist Dr. Erica McAllister, curator of the Fly Collection at London's Natural History Museum. Teenage podcaster Charlie Cuff talks about his latest project, interviewing Second World War veterans. And overseas correspondent William Yang is on the line from Taiwan, where all eyes are on Hong Kong. On Nights after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. All the North Island except Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington. Rain or showers, sometimes heavy with hail. Squally thunderstorms from Taranaki northwards, gradually easing from the west tomorrow. Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington, fine spells and a few showers, possibly heavy. Rain developing in Gisborne later tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine, becoming cloudy and isolated showers developing from tomorrow afternoon. Nelson and Buller to Fiordland, scattered showers, some heavy with hail, thunderstorms isolated, gradually clearing and becoming fine tomorrow. Otago and Southland, a few showers about the southern lakes and coastal Southland, fine elsewhere, showers spreading everywhere tomorrow. Chatham Islands, a few showers turning to rain, possible thunderstorms, heavy falls tonight, becoming fine for a time tomorrow morning, and then the rain returns tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's coming up to 9 minutes past 6.
If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. EQC has settled with a Christchurch homeowner just days before their test case was due to be heard at the High Court. Jamie Gibbling used his KiwiSaver to buy his first family home in New Brighton after the quakes, believing it had been properly repaired. He later learned the repairs were botched and would cost $300,000 to fix. His on-sold test case was supposed to be heard on Monday to clarify who was liable. But today, EQC announced it had reached a settlement with the family and that agreement would provide a framework for the 54 other claimants, also with Shine lawyers. Finance and EQC Minister Grant Robertson last week announced an on-sold settlement kitty of $300 million for the next 12 months. But legal experts working with claimants have told Checkpoint it could cost taxpayers much, much more. EQC's Deputy Chief Executive is Renee Walker. Late this afternoon, she came into the studio and I asked her if the Gibblings got what they asked for and if the 54 others who signed up to the class action would get the same.
So what we've agreed with Shine is that we'll use a two-tiered approach where we will review any costs that they have. We'll agree a repair methodology, we'll agree the cost of that, and the cost of repairs will be paid. If we can't agree directly, and with Jamie we're able to do a lot of the negotiation directly, if we can't do that, then we'll use the Independent Dispute Resolution Service, which is part of the GCCRS.
So, ballpark, what are these 55 cases going to cost you?
Well, we don't know that yet because we need to work through each one case by case, because some of them will be foundation repairs, some of them will be simple repairs. It's the same process we follow with any repair.
You must have had some advice on liability around these on-solds though, so what figures?
No, we haven't. On these 54, we haven't, because we haven't been in negotiations.
What about the total number of cases of on-solds? Have you had some liability assessment on that?
So the government has estimated that the ex gratia payments will be around $300 million.
We're being told by lawyers involved and people involved in these cases it's going to be way north of the $300 million. What happens then?
Yep, so the $300 million is for the ex gratia payment, and that is very specific. That's for the group of homeowners who haven't been able to get resolution before, and just for misscoped or unscoped damage. There's also defective repairs, and we do think the whole total will be around $1 billion.
$1 billion? Yep. And where's that coming from? What budget? Where?
Well, that's what we've been discussing for some time. So I think you have covered it before, that it was always estimated it would be up to $1 billion. So far, we've spent over $450 million on defective repairs. We've also got this $300 million that's now part of the ex gratia policy. And then we think there's probably about another $300 million, so up to $1 billion.
So $1 billion for EQC botch-ups?
Yes, and misscoped damage.
So, do you owe the taxpayer an apology here?
Absolutely, and we've apologised several times. We've said we haven't always got it right. It is $1 billion out of $11 billion, still not good enough, but we are here to put things right, and I think this is a really good policy because it does provide a solution for a group of homeowners that haven't had one to date.
So how much did EQC spend on preparing this test case?
So not just for the Gibbling case, but in preparing for on-solds and looking at liability and the Gibbling case, the total to date is $1.3 million in legal fees. And again, if we continue down that road, it's not acceptable to the taxpayer. I don't think either of us want to sit here and hear we're paying those types of fees. So it wasn't just about the Gibbling case, it was about testing other things and about the on-solds, but it is $1.3 million.
Why didn't you cut your losses earlier and pay up?
Well, everyone wanted to test points of law, so we needed to get through this investigation phase. And now where we are at is we've done the investigation. We believe that it's not going to be a costly or a it's going to take too much time, basically, to go through that process. There will still be people that want to test it through the courts and will have to go to court. So that investigative work will still be used probably sometime in the future. But we needed to do this process, and we didn't have the government policy to be able to settle before now.
So when did you first get advice to drop this test case?
We didn't really get advice to drop the test case. What we got advice on, and the more we learnt through the investigation phase, is the test case, or the case, was very specific to the issues of the case.
Yeah, so you realise that the test case is not going to achieve what you want it to achieve. When did you know that?
Within the last month.
Yet you carried on allowing the other side to make legal preparations?
Well, we didn't have the government policy, so we couldn't have settled the cost of repairs. At that point, we were talking about whether we are liable for the cost of repairs.
So you knew that this wasn't going to achieve what you wanted to, but you were ploughing on ahead and spending money on legal fees, etc., regardless of the fact that you knew it wasn't going to deliver what was needed.
It wasn't whether it was going to deliver what was needed. So we could still go to court and we could win or lose, and then we've still got a group of homeowners. If we went to court and won, we'd still have a group of homeowners for whom there's no solution. So what I think is we've got a government policy that provides a solution to those people. Whether we should have done it sooner or later, it's not worth debating. What we've got now
really,
is a policy
because it's taxpayer money. It's taxpayer money. So a lot of people out there do think it's worth debating.
And we think the $1.3 million, in the scheme of the fact that it's going to cost estimated $300 million, is probably a prudent use of that legal cost.
I see your number one objective for EQC on your website. It says efficient management and settlement of claims, timeliness and accuracy. How did you do in achieving your number one objective here with Onsolds?
Once we started engaging with the Gibbling family, we've gone from engagement last Thursday until a settlement today.
It's been going way longer than last Thursday, so I'm asking you, how did you do when your number one objective is efficient management and settlement of claims?
So once we've had the policy to be able to settle on-sold overcapped claims, I think we've done very well, because in a week we've settled this claim. Previous to that, we didn't have the ability under the Act to actually make these settlements. So I think that in a week, being able to achieve this outcome for this family is outstanding, and that's what I'm proud of, and that's why I do the job that I do. I've spoken to Jamie several times over the last week, and all he ever wanted was to be able to repair his home. Today I had a text from him to say, I want to thank you for all your help, because he can do that now. So what, you're saying you did a good job and you've done a solid by the others who are involved in this test case as well, because they say that they've been really stressed out, pushed to their absolute financial limits, and it's almost busted some of them financially. Mm-hmm. Yep. So you still think you did a good job? Under the Act, we couldn't pay them. So we go to work every day. We want to settle claims for homeowners. So it hasn't been a nice environment for our staff that have had to say, no, we can't pay this under the Act. What we've got now is ability to do it, and I've got staff who are proactively ringing people saying, great, we've now got an outcome for you. So there were a group of homeowners. There wasn't a solution for them. No one felt comfortable with that. That is why there is a policy that we can now do something for them.
So you don't think EQC did anything wrong in the handling of all of this? You've done the best you can all the way along?
No, we can always do better. We can always do better, and we've turned things around. Are we great? No, but everything we've done over the last 12 months is to make things better for homeowners. This was the last group, and I do think that it is a great solution for them. And if we can be measured on our performance now that we've got the ability to do it, then in a year's time, I'm really happy to come back. And if we haven't settled them, then we haven't done well by them. But we've now got the policy that at least we can try.
Is EQC going to be taking on responsibility and liability for the Southern Response claimants?
No. So we are working closely with Southern Response, and obviously they're looking at what their transition plans are, but there's nothing that's been agreed to date.
So when the government says it's looking to wrap up Southern Response, EQC is absolutely not taking on those unresolved claims?
I think what they've said is that it would be a service like EQC or GCCRS, and we are talking to them about what that may look like, but there's no agreements in place yet.
So there's a possibility you could be taking over?
There is a possibility.
Have you been having any conversations with the Chief Executive of Southern Response,
yes.
Mr Honeybone?
Yes.
What's the nature of those conversations?
We have a very good working relationship, and we do talk about these things all the time.
What specifically?
So we have teams of staff that are co-located. I have teams that are co-located in their offices so that we can make sure that we get a streamlined experience for our customers. We've put a lot of improvements in place there. We talk about operational matters. But in terms of maybe
taking on responsibility for their claimants and taking on their liabilities, have you had conversations with him about that?
We've talked about what that would look like if we had a consolidated claims program, yes.
And what about specifically about this system that they had been running with 2 quotes, detailed repair analysis? Have you had any conversations with him about that?
Not in detail, no.
None at all?
No.
So Grant Robertson has said today that this is a mess and he's inherited it. Is he right when he calls it a mess?
I think, so I live in Christchurch, Anthony lives in Christchurch. I think we go to work every day trying to do the right thing by people. Could we have done things better? Absolutely. And we've both said that many times. I've always fronted up and said that. I think our CEOs fronted up and said that. Is it a mess? We've done our best and we're at the tail of a very complex program. And yes, that's not good enough for the people who still have claims that are unresolved, but we are doing our best to resolve those issues.
So is your responsible minister wrong when he characterises this as a mess?
No, I'm not going to comment on how it's been characterised. All I'm saying is we do our best every day.
So that's EQC's Deputy Chief Executive, Renee Walker. Do let us know your thoughts on that. Do you think EQC has done its best and done its best every day? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Particularly keen to hear from you if you are one of the people with an unsolved. A court has heard a man accused of murdering a Northland toddler look like a rabbit in the headlights after the girl died. Aaron Archer is on trial in the High Court in Auckland, accused of murdering his former girlfriend's daughter in their Mangawhai home. Today marks 1 year since Aria Dawn Roberts died in his care. And today the jury learned she isn't the first child her mother has lost. Annika Smith reports.
It's the Crown's case that Mr Archer assaulted Aria when her mother was at the supermarket. He denies this and at the time of her death told those around him the pair were playing when she hit her head. This morning, the evidence of Dr Aaron Donald, a doctor called to the scene, was read to the jury. He told police he arrived at the Mangawhai address to find 3 women, including Aria's mother, sitting at a picnic table and Mr Archer standing off by himself. These are his words, but not his voice.
Aaron looked to be in shock. He was holding his head, moaning and distressed. He couldn't keep still. He was pacing around and looked scared, like a rabbit in the headlights.
By this time, first responders had made a decision to stop CPR. A post-mortem would later identify Aria died of an acute brain injury. Mr Donald said he approached Aria's mother to tell her the news.
Before I was able to say anything to her, she said, don't tell me, I don't want to hear it." She mentioned that Aria was a twin, and her twin had died at birth and thought that God was punishing her.
The doctor sat with the woman, who can't be named, outside the house.
She mentioned that she felt bad she had left Aria with Aaron and wasn't home when it happened. While this was happening, Aaron was trying to apologise and reassure her that it wasn't her fault. He responded to this by telling Aaron to leave her alone.
He said he approached Mr Archer because the man was agitated and Aria's family seemed to be ignoring him.
He then asked me if Aria was okay and what was going to happen next. He told me we were playing, I swung her and she hit her head. He told me she was shaking and he couldn't wake her up.
On Tuesday, the jury heard from St John Ambulance Officer Josephine Grice, one of the first responders at the scene. She relayed a similar story to that heard by Mr Donald.
He came over and was speaking to Mark, so what's the protocol now? Mark did reply to him. It was something like, you just have to wait and see what the police tell us to do. He said, I was just playing with her. I was swinging her around and she hit her head on something.
What is known of Mr Archer's account of that night is limited to what first responders heard him say at the time. Stories have varied, one neighbour saying he overheard he dropped the girl, while medical staff recall Mr Archer saying he was swinging her around when she hit her head. Mr Archer denies assaulting Aria, his defence lawyer Annabelle Maxwell-Scott describing it as a tragic accident. The trial before Justice Fata in a jury is expected to finish by the end of next week. Atu i te ko ti matua ko Annika Smith aho.
Iwi in the far north have renewed calls for the speed limit outside Mahimaru Marae to be slashed in half after a car crashed into the Marae Atia, taking out 2 palm trees and a power pole. Ngā Tā Koto and the neighbouring iwi have been calling for change to the State Highway 10 speed limit for the last 20 years and now ask how much more damage it will take before they're heard. Te Aniwa Hurihanganui reports.
Whānau from Mahimaru Marae are counting their blessings after a car travelling at 100 kilometres an hour swerved on State Highway 10 between Tapia and Awanui and crashed into the fence outside the whare on Monday. Peter Lucas says the incident could have been deadly.
A British tourist ran off the road, demolishing the Marae Atia fence, destroyed part of the mahau of the tomokanga. Had a hui, a tangihanga, or any traditional gathering been happening at the marae, lives would have been lost.
He says his whānau from Ngai Takoto and neighbouring iwi Ngāti Kahu, which has a marae 300 metres down the road, have been calling for more than 2 decades for the speed limit to be cut.
We've been asking for the speed limit along State Highway 10. In front of our marae, there are a number of marae along that road. Speeding along that road is just out of control. It's not just the fence that belongs to somebody's house. It's the fence of a marae. Behind that fence are generations of whānau. We are being regarded as invisible.
There have been 151 crashes on this stretch of highway between 2009 and 2018, resulting in 3 deaths and 12 serious injuries. The Transport Agency says the speed limit is currently under review and it is considering reducing it to 80 kilometres an hour. But the Chief Executive of Te Runanga o Ngāti Kahu, Anahira Herbert Graves, says she wants the limit cut to 50.
We've just had near-miss accidents, several fatalities in that time. When you go through Cooper's Beach and Cable Bay, you have to reduce down to 60 through those settlements. What the heck is the difference? On the stretch of road we're talking about, there's a kohanga reo, 2 marae, several ECE home-based centres, children coming and going, people. We've got our church, our urupa.
Anahira Herbert Graves says if the speed limit doesn't change soon, her people will take the matter into their own hands.
Basically, we've said to them, if you don't do it, we'll take steps ourselves. Our tamariki have already painted the signs. We're having to put high-vis vests on our children so that they will be seen by vehicles travelling through our settlement.
Police have confirmed they are investigating the crash, but no charges have been laid. In the meantime, whānau are set to hold karakia to restore the balance of the Marae Atia, and they hope drivers will slow down before any more harm is done. For Checkpoint, I'm Te Aniwa Hurihanganui.
A group of students, including some youth MPs, have been banned from Parliament for a year after singing a waiata in the public gallery in support of the Ehu Mātau Hikoi. A dozen or so protesters stood up and sung while holding the Tino Rangatiratanga flag at the end of question time. Here's political reporter Yvette McCullough.
The protesters broke out into song as MPs moved on from question time. Speaker Trevor Mallard's call for order was ignored.
I'm warning the people in the gallery to stop now.
It is against Parliament's rules for people in the public gallery to disrupt proceedings, and they were promptly escorted out by security.
All individuals in the gallery will face a 1-year ban from the buildings.
The protesters, all aged around 18 years old, say they did this to bring attention to the Ehu Mātau Hikoi, weaving its way to Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's electorate office today. The stunt was organised through word of mouth, with some in the group only meeting each other for the first time as they went into the public gallery. Out the front of Parliament, the group's de facto spokespeople explained why they did this. Jack Liang, wearing a T-shirt that reads Ehu Mātau, says this was about showing solidarity with the Hikoi.
And it's just a total call the Hikoi that it's happening up in Tamaki Makaurau right now. They are taking this kaupapa to Jacinda Ardern's doorstep, and we thought we'd take it to her other doorstep.
Kelsey Lee says this is an important issue for her because what's happening at Ehu Mātau is hurtful. She says she was disappointed with the Speaker's reaction.
Yeah, I mean, we were just there, in peace, just to tautoko ihumātao, so it was a little bit disappointing that they were so aggressive about it. We're just exercising, our civil rights, really, as members of public.
But Trevor Mallard says the punishment he handed out was standard practice.
First of all, when people interrupt Parliament, they get a period of a ban, but when they defy an instruction to stop, then there is it becomes more serious.
The group also included Green Party youth MPs for Goras Garaman, Jan Logie and Chloe Swarbrick, Lily Chen, Ari Faber and Luke Wijon.
Not that she told us to do this or any of that.
No, that's how we know each other.
Yeah, that's how we know each other.
Send Lily a text on the day.
News of their one-year ban is a surprise to them.
This is the first time hearing of that. Didn't know we were banned from Parliament. No one told us any of that. But, yeah.
Still worth it, though. I can still protest outside Parliament. That's what matters, right?
And it seems these youth MPs are following in some current MPs' footsteps.
I think there are at least 2 current members of Parliament who have had matters of trespass and court experiences as a result of behaviour defying speakers.
Were you one of them?
Yes.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
People in northern parts of the country could be in for a wild night with strong winds, heavy rain and thunderstorms, and perhaps even the potential for tornadoes. Chen Liu has the details.
Last week, a violent storm ripped through Auckland, causing damage to homes and dozens of boats. And the city could be in for a repeat performance tonight. By lunchtime today, 15 lightning strikes had been recorded around the region. Those taking part in a Hikoi from ihumātao to the Prime Minister's electorate office coped the worst of the sudden downpours. About 150 protesters had gumboots, jackets and umbrellas as they marched across the city. But Mana Whenua representative Eru Rakena says they weren't deterred by the weather.
So we battled high winds and we battled pouring rain. That can only be evidence that we are very serious and very passionate about our cause.
Met Service says a very unstable air mass moving across the country from the Tasman Sea is responsible for the bad weather. Forecaster Angus Hines says severe weather watches have been issued for the Upper North Island.
Some rain watches out for the potential of significant accumulations of rain through parts of the central North Island. That's areas like Waitomo, Taumaranui, Taupo, Taranaki and Taihape, as well as parts of the Bay of Plenty.
Mr. Hines says the worst of it will hit overnight and tomorrow morning.
Kicking off late this evening and running through until around about 6 a.m. on Friday, we're expecting the most severe weather at the top of the country, so it could be a bit of a wild night in store for some of those northern areas.
The line's company Vector says they are braced for power cuts and additional crews are on standby. But Niwa says this sort of weather isn't unusual at this time of year. Here is forecaster Nawa Fadaf.
So this is kind of the time of year where we expect thunderstorm activity. We've got cooler air in the upper atmosphere, relatively warm at the bottom, and those are conditions that are really good for producing thunderstorms. And when you do have thunderstorms, there is an increased risk of getting tornadoes as well.
But there is a glimmer of hope in the weekend, with Met Service forecasting more settled weather. Mo te hotaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Chen Liu tēnei.
Thanks for your company. We'll be back again tomorrow. Catch you then.